And we're going to hit record as well. Excellent, excellent, folks. So I would like to introduce Eryc to you. Hi, Eryc. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to quickly tell you all the story. Okay, let's just see if everyone's in. So I met Eryc on the interwebs, but it wasn't like a dating site or Tinder or anything like that. I was lying in bed. Okay, and that's going to be like the last time I talk about my bed and Eryc in the same sentence, but I was lying in bed, like flicking through LinkedIn, and I found an article, the 6 E's of employee engagement. And that morning, I just decided I'm going to read, and I started reading this article, and I went like, I was reading it on my phone. So I go, no shit, I want to sketch note this. So I went and I ran and I got my iPad and my iPad pencil, and Johan brought me coffee. I said, Johan, I'm not going anywhere. Like, I have no meetings until 10 o'clock. I'm just going to sit in bed. I found this amazing article. I'm just going to sketch note this article. So it was like sheer indulgence. This was like in my pajamas with Eric's article in my one hand and my iPad. And later that day, I posted the article. And a few days later, I posted the sketch note with the article. And a few days later, Eryc reached out to me. And people, it was love at first sight. He has got such a beautiful soul. I love this man. It feels like we were separated at birth. And yeah, he's just incredible. Eryc, you are like one of my COVID loves. I'm so glad I met you. And since then we've had many we had many happy hours together. Eryc, I'm sorry, I'm embarrassing you and me with the story. But I'm so happy that you could join us today. And people, I think just a man that yearns for making workplaces places where people can really live their fullest potential, where they can be treated with kindness and compassion, and where they get to make a contribution. So Eryc, thank you so much. I didn't even ask you what you were going to speak about because I trust you so unconditionally, and I just love your message to the world.
Oh, thank you, Chantel. Thank you. You know, I am so delighted to be here. I am such an admirer of everything that Brand Love does, everything that you do. And therefore, I'm an admirer of everyone who's here today. So thanks, everybody, for being here. I would like to be able to share my screen if I could.
Absolutely. And you should, you know what, I'm just going to make you co-host because then you can do whatever you need to do. All right. So you should
Delightful.
be able to share.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So good afternoon, everybody. I know you've already had a full and inspiring day, and I just want to kind of take it all home for you today and talk about the importance of, from your roles as kind of change agents and leaders in your organizations. And we'll talk a little bit about what I mean by leaders in a couple minutes. But I just want to talk about how you all can cultivate engaged employees in a hybrid workplace. And so I want to take you through this. And I know that some of you are going to say, well, you know, employee engagement, that's not really my job. And I'm here to tell you it is. And so I just want to give you a framework, and Chantel mentioned the 6 E's. I'm going to teach you a little bit this afternoon about how to apply those 6 E's to create awesome cultures and to cultivate engaged employees, whether in a hybrid workplace, in a co-located workspace, in a fully remote, it doesn't matter. So with that, I'm going to just jump right into it. But I guess before I do, I just want to make sure I want to be able to see everybody, because I just want to ask you, you know, if you're feeling what I'm feeling about this whole pandemic thing. So maybe just raise your hands if you would rather never hear the word pandemic again. Yeah. How about the word unprecedented? social distancing. Oh my gosh. Yes. So tired of it, right? Well, I've got a new word for you. It's not new. It's the word you've all been hearing, and it is hybrid. I just want you to take a look at some of these hybrids for a second, and and feel disturbed by them. So, I do a lot of reading, like Chantel. I do a lot of reading of LinkedIn while I'm sitting in bed. I do a lot of reading of Harvard Business Review, and all this writing, and you're probably encountering it too, is about the hybrid workplace. And I'm talking to a lot of leaders and a lot of different kinds of organizations, and they're all worried about engaging employees, maintaining workplace culture in a hybrid workplace. Is anybody else concerned about that? Thinking about that? Worried about that? A few of us. Yeah. Okay, good. What I'm seeing is leaders who are so nervous about this idea, so worried about maintaining workplace culture, that they're insisting that people come back to the office. Right? There's this belief that if we're all together in one place, we're going to innovate better, we're going to collaborate better, we're going to have a better culture. The research actually on this is not that firm. In fact, we can find innovation and collaboration in lots of different kinds of spaces, but we have to do it intentionally. And I think it's understandable that hybrid is a kind of scary idea. It's an unknown, right? And a lot of us haven't done this kind of thing before. And I don't know about you all, but after like a year and a half of doing a million things that I haven't done before, I've having my groceries delivered, having Zoom happy hours, sanitizing my junk mail. I want a few things that I have done before. Right? I want a little bit more certainty. I want things to be more precedented. But a lot of leaders now are saying in order to do that, they want to call all their employees to come back to an office. Right? Goldman Sachs, Facebook, big companies, but also smaller companies are saying we need to have our fellow humans back in an office together. And in some cases, I've even read CEOs who are saying if employees don't come back to an office, then they're going to be fired. And on the flip side of that, I've also seen research that shows that a lot of us as employees of organizations are saying, if you insist that I come back to an office full time, maybe I won't come back at all. And maybe I'll do something else, right? So I get that some of these leaders want this going back to the way things were, right? I think it has a comforting delusion of certainty. I know what that was before, and so I know what's going to be like when we return. But that's a delusion too, right? The human beings who are coming back are not the same human beings who left in March 2020. This experience has changed all of us. COVID-19 was not a change, it was a transformation, which is the kind of change you can't go back from. It helped to clarify our values. It pointed out the folly of some of our mundane activities like commuting or even business travel. And for, the great resignation that's happening right now is showing us that, for a lot of us, it's helped to clarify what we're willing to put up with and what we're not willing to put up with in the workplace. I think that this pull back to the office is a lot like the pull back to the good old days, which is a magical and completely fictional time when everyone was completely happy at work. Right? People were laughing together in the break room. They were bonding over the foosball table. They were being heroically productive. But that is a delusion too. I mean, think about it for yourselves. Were things really so great in the office before the pandemic? If I remember that time correctly, and it's totally possible given the last year and a half that I don't remember it correctly, but if I do, I remember a lot of leaders telling me that collaboration wasn't happening, that productivity wasn't great, that engagement was low. And so the good old days back in the office probably weren't so great after all. And for that reason, I think the greatest sin we could commit as we step into this return to the office phase would be to just go back to the way things were before. So much learning and growth has occurred. So many new ways of working have been discovered. So many bureaucracies have just been smashed that I think it'd be criminal to leave all that behind in favor of the way things used to be. I know that for all of us, certainly for me, it's a frightening and risk-filled time, but it's also, I believe, a time of immense possibility for organizations, for us as individuals, for our societies. But I make that argument to leaders all the time, and when I do, they inevitably bring up the dreaded C word. And when I say the C word, I mean culture. Culture is probably the most used and least understood word in the corporate lexicon. Leaders are saying that if their fellow humans don't come back to an office, then culture will suffer. They say, how can we maintain our culture when we're not together in an office? But I ask them, you mean the culture that wasn't working before the pandemic? That's the culture that you want to bring back into the office? And then the question that I ask is, well, first of all, what do you mean when you say culture? And I get a lot of the same answers you've probably heard before. I get, culture is the way we do things around here. I get phrases like, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Some leaders tell me culture is our values and our rituals. And others say culture is our organization's immune system. Now, assuming that any of those definitions is true, and I'm not saying they're inaccurate, I'm just saying they're inadequate. But if they're at all true, what does an office have to do with any of that? I ask you, without an office, do you still have a way we do things around here? Do you still have values and rituals? Does your organization still have an immune system that preserves stability and resists change? Of course. The answer to all those questions is yes. And that's because culture doesn't live in an office. It lives in people. So whether a workplace is 100% co-located, 100% distributed, or a hybrid, it has a culture. And that culture can be cultivated. Here is what culture is, according to Eryc. Culture is our beliefs and assumptions about what's expected of us. And it's our beliefs and assumptions about what's expected of us. And we develop those beliefs and assumptions based on what we learn and experience together in the workplace over time. I'm going to say that again. We develop these beliefs and assumptions based on what we learn and experience together over time. Not what we're told, not what the posters on the wall say, but what we learn and experience over time. So as I work in a workplace, I may come to believe that I'm expected to help my fellow humans learn and grow. Or I might learn and experience things over time that teach me that I'm expected to throw elbows and compete against my colleagues in order to get noticed, to get recognition. I also might develop a belief that I'm expected to enthusiastically pursue challenging goals, or I might develop a belief that I'm expected to not rock the boat too much. If culture is our beliefs and assumptions about what's expected of us, and we form those beliefs and assumptions based on what we learn and experience, we can cultivate great cultures, and great cultures can inspire employees to be engaged. But I want to define that term too, employee engagement, because I think it's not something that everybody agrees on. I'm going to define an engaged employee or employee engagement as that authentic emotional connection and commitment that we form to the work that we do. It's an authentic emotional connection and commitment. That means that you can't do it to someone. We can't engage other people. As employees of organizations, we develop that thing called engagement. So we can't engage employees, but we can cultivate great cultures that lead to more engaged employees. I used to say that, and probably said it last year to brand love folks. I used to say that culture could exist by design or by default. And I used to like that phrase because I think it was alliterative, and phrases that are alliterative or that rhyme always seem more true to me somehow. But after years of working in this field, I'm not sure I believe in design or default as it relates to culture anymore. Instead, I think you can have culture by carelessness or by cultivation. You can have it by neglect or by nourishment. I still like those alliterations, you can see. But the trouble is that behind all of this talk of returning to the office to preserve culture, there's a common but a misguided assumption about culture, and that is that it can be designed and built. That's just not true. I'm going to take a little step back and a step to the side and say, in 2016, there was a book by a psychologist and a philosopher named Alison Gopnik. That book is called The Gardener and the Carpenter. And in it, Dr. Gopnik presented a metaphor that I think is going to be extremely useful to us as we plot our path forward. Before I take this any further, though, I do want to say that Gopnik's book is about parenting primarily. And we often use parenting metaphors in the workplace. And when we do, we're at risk of infantilizing our fellow humans. We're at risk of reducing them to being children. And I'm not here for that. But I do think that this metaphor provides some valuable lessons that we can apply to cultivating great cultures. So over the next few minutes, using this framework, I want to offer you some new ways of thinking about culture and employee engagement that I hope will serve you. So let's begin with the most common assumption, right? Which is that leaders, as they navigate the future of work, believe that, like carpenters, they simply need to have the right plan, the right raw materials, and the right tools. And then they can build the right culture. So if you're a culture carpenter, you might craft a set of values for the hybrid workplace. And then based on those values, maybe you'll create some supporting policies and procedures and processes. And then that culture carpenter is going to broadcast, bribe, badger, berate employees to get them to adopt those values, to adopt the policies, to adopt the procedures and processes. And then culture's done, right? Of course it's not. But it's an appealing idea, right? We'd all like to imagine that we, or anyone really, had that much control over a complex phenomenon like workplace culture. And I think this idea has its roots in a very industrial age, mechanistic conception of humans, of our motivations, of our needs, of our behaviors. And if those mechanistic ideas ever made sense, it was only because we were living in more stable, more certain, simpler times when humans were primarily a means of production. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world that is volatile. It's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. But it's a world in which value is created when human beings interact. And a world in which culture has a larger effect on results than almost any other factor. So this mechanistic dehumanizing metaphor just doesn't make sense. But fortunately, there's two parts to Gopnik's book. And the second part is the gardener. Now see, a gardener doesn't design and build. A gardener creates the conditions in which flowers bloom, vegetables grow, and beautiful plants gradually crowd out the weeds. But a gardener neither designs nor controls the outcome of the garden. The gardener doesn't say, hey, I want to have some cucumbers here and I want there to be 6 of them. And I want to have 12 sunflowers over here. A garden is also a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous place in which so many factors come together to influence the outcomes. And most of those factors are outside the gardener's control. So the gardener would be foolish to try to control those things. Instead, the gardener tries to create the conditions in which all the elements work together in harmony. The gardener pairs knowledge with discipline, and nature does the rest. So I often find when I get into this topic, I sound like I'm an expert on gardening, and I want to say I am not. Some of you know much more about gardening than I do. But as I understand it, the disciplines of gardening are pretty simple if they're not necessarily easy. Planting, feeding, watering, weeding. We repeat as necessary, we pay attention, and we sense and respond to change. So, how does this apply to culture? Well, When it comes to culture, leaders have an inordinate amount of influence over the culture that they cultivate. And I want to define leader for you for a second. A leader is any person who brings out the best in their fellow humans. A leader is any person who brings out the best in their fellow humans, not necessarily the people at the top of the hierarchy, but every one of you. And all of us have an enormous amount of influence over culture. But do we have that as carpenters or do we have it as gardeners? That's the question. And I'll submit to you that we all are gardeners. Managers, leaders, customer experience professionals will play key roles in addressing the challenges, making the most of the opportunities, ensuring that the next best phase is the best phase ever. And I think we'll do that as gardeners. And you've already come to understand that I love words. And so I just want to check myself here if you think I've lost my mind on this whole garden metaphor. And I want to share with you the etymology of the word culture. Right? From the 15th century, culture meant the tilling of land, the act of preparing the earth for crops. It came from a verb that meant to tend, to guard, to till, to cultivate. That's what culture is. So as we move forward in the hybrid workplace, a leader's job is not to design and build culture, but to cultivate it, to create the conditions in which our fellow humans choose to engage with the work to be done, in which we and our fellow humans maximize the contributions that we make, not just to work, but to our world. This is a place in which we can become the best and highest versions of ourselves. And this is what I call a human-centric workplace. I believe that a hybrid workplace must be a human-centric workplace. And when I say human-centric, I mean a workplace that values humans. And that's whether you call them customers or employees or suppliers or shareholders. A human-centric workplace values humans. It's a workplace built around human needs, physiological, social, psychological, emotional needs. A human-centric workplace is one in which our fellow humans can make awesome contributions and become the best versions of themselves. It's one that contributes to a more just, equitable, and inclusive world. And fundamentally, it's a workplace that our fellow humans just want to be a part of, not one we have to make them come back to. So to accomplish this kind of workplace, I believe that all of us, just like gardeners, need to follow some simple, though not easy, disciplines. And this is where I bring in the 6 E's. The 6 E's, which Chantel alluded to in the introduction, are empathize and courage, educate, enable, empower, and embrace. And we're going to step through each of these 6 here in the next few minutes and talk about how we can apply those to cultivate great cultures and employee engagement in a hybrid workplace. Does that all sound good? Y'all with me? Awesome. All right, so the first E is empathize. And empathize is all about listening to our fellow humans with the goal of developing empathy for what they experience in the hybrid workplace. You've encountered this with customer experience, right? Great customer experience starts with customer listening. Great employee experience starts with employee listening. And here we're trying to develop deep empathy, cognitive empathy, which is, I understand how you feel, but also affective empathy, which is, I feel what you feel. And so we want to understand what's important to our fellow humans, what's scaring them about this next phase, what's inspiring them about this next phase. And more practically, what do they need to be successful and what's getting in their way? And those two things, what do they need to be successful and what's getting in their way, are things we're going to take forward and apply in the following 5 E's. To develop this kind of empathy, we can't just do surveys. Surveys are great and they're useful tools, but they provide the average experience. And we really need to listen to understand the individual differences. Now, all of our fellow humans in the workplace have always had needs and motivations and fears and aspirations that are as distinct as fingerprints, but it's more important and just plain practical now to understand the distinctions between individuals. Organizations generally, and HR professionals especially, prefer policies that apply equally to everyone. But going forward, we're going to need to find ways to balance fairness with flexibility so that we can adopt approaches that are people-driven, not just policy-driven. So with Empathize, we're going to ask a lot of questions, and we're going to listen deeply to develop that cognitive and affective empathy. And we're going to take that forward to the rest of the E's. The second E is encourage. And encourage is all about involving our fellow humans in solving problems and addressing opportunities related to the hybrid workplace. Now, a common misconception in organizations is that it's managers and senior leaders who solve all the meaningful problems, right? And then those people deliver solutions to employees who have to implement them and adopt them. And then you have to do that thing called change management. But organizations that do this deprive themselves of the intelligence and the insights and the input, the brain power of the majority of their workforce. So instead, with Encourage, we're involving our fellow humans in solving the difficult problems related to hybrid work, soliciting their input, including them in implementation of adjustments and improvements. So to do this, a lot of organizations have developed return to work task forces. And just sidebar, I hate this phrase, return to work. As you all know, everybody's been working really hard this whole time. But that's an aside. These task forces are actually a really great way to get employees involved in addressing problems and opportunities related to this next phase. So rather than locking our top leaders in a Zoom room or in a conference room to solve everything, we're inviting our fellow humans to identify the areas we need to focus on related to hybrid work. That might be workspace redesign or scheduling changes or technologies or workflows. And then we're getting those folks involved in areas that interest them and areas that they can make a meaningful contribution to drive improvements and drive changes. So that's the second E, encourage. The third E is educate. And I know you all know that in a corporate context, when we say educate, we often think we mean training. But that's not what we're talking about here. This is about developing a shared understanding of what's important in the organization, why it's important, and what each of our roles is going to be in this new hybrid context. This kind of shared understanding can't be developed through a monologue. It's not a one-way communication. It's a dialogic process. Now, I know that organizations are going to have a lot to communicate about what the heck's going on and how are we going to do things going forward. But we're all more likely to engage with those messages when we understand the why first. And providing our fellow humans with clarity and context is always beneficial, but even more so in times of uncertainty. And to boil this down and make this really clear, I believe that Educate tries to develop the answers to 4 key questions. What are the organization's top priorities right now? Why are those things important? How does my role affect those priorities? And what does the organization need most from me right now? I want you to think about those 4 questions. If everyone in the organization had an answer to those 4 questions, how much power could you unleash? How much more likely is it that those people would develop that authentic emotional connection and commitment to what they're here to do by answering those 4 questions? And again, you can't provide those 4 answers. Those are answers that we need to come to together. The 4th E is enable. And enable is all about equipping our fellow humans with the knowledge, the skills. Oh my gosh, my light is terrible. Hold on 1 second. I'm turning into a raccoon here. There we go. That's better. So it's all about equipping our fellow humans with the knowledge, the skills, the tools, the resources that they need to be successful. Now you'll remember that we asked them in Empathize, what do you need to be successful? Here we have the opportunity to deliver, right? They've told us what they need. And by following through on what our fellow humans have asked for, we're not only enabling better performance, but we're also laying a foundation for trust. And right now, and when it comes to enabling our fellow humans, physical health and well-being are going to be of paramount importance. But also emotional and psychological well-being. This has been a difficult time for all of us. So we need to make sure that all of our fellow humans are aware of and able to access employee assistance programs, employee resource groups, telemedicine, anything that's going to support and enable them. Also, as part of Enable, sorry, I'm still getting the sun. Okay, it's morning here. In case you didn't notice, it's morning in the U.S. So the other thing that we need to do to enable is we need to train managers and supervisors to become coaches. And this is really important. When I say a coach, I mean somebody who can focus on their fellow humans' development and well-being, not on just performance management and supervision of tasks. But our people managers and supervisors aren't necessarily automatically equipped to do that. They need help knowing how to be coaches. So that's Enable. The fifth E is the sister of Enable, and it is Empower. And Empower is about removing friction and making it easy for our fellow humans to do what they need to do in a hybrid context. So one of the places that we focus on with Empower is our policies and our processes. Policies and processes have an enormous amount of influence in organizations, and they often have unintended consequences. And I'm sure you've encountered these, especially as it comes to customer experience. So we need to be rooting out the unintended consequences, the biases that are excluding some of our fellow humans or limiting the ways that they can contribute in the organization. And we also, with Empower, might need to implement new policies and processes to make it easy for our fellow humans to make their greatest contributions, to do what they're here to do in this new environment. Now, in all likelihood, your existing policies and processes were created under a completely different set of circumstances and with a completely different context in mind. So it's only natural that we would need to adjust them so that our fellow humans can perform in this new context. And here we can encourage our fellow humans to propose new and improved ways of working. Over the past year and a half, people have made spontaneous changes to how they work. Teams have changed how they work together. Communication has changed. How goals and priorities are established and managed and communicated has changed in some cases. And so we can look at these and say, which of these changes should we sustain in the hybrid workplace? What additional changes might we need to make? Because as we're empowering our employees, our fellow humans, during this transitional time, we need to make sure that they have the room to do what needs to be done, to adopt the mindsets, the behaviors, and the attitudes that we need to see. And finally, one thing that we can do as leaders to empower during this transitional time is default to yes. So over the past year and a half, we've been asked to stay home, to avoid our friends and family, to miss birthdays and weddings and funerals. And so it can feel like no is the default to almost anything we want to do right now. But in the hybrid workplace, we can empower our fellow humans to truly engage, to develop that emotional connection and commitment by saying yes as much as possible. If our impulse is to say no, and sometimes that happens, that's just an indication that we should stop and reflect on whether it's really necessary to say no. If we can say yes without endangering our fellow humans or the business, we should do it, because that's going to contribute to that sense of authentic emotional connection and commitment. The final E is embrace. And this is all about noticing and celebrating when our fellow humans exhibit the attitudes, the mindsets, and the behaviors that will make the hybrid workplace successful. I always say, never underestimate the power of catching people doing something right. We're all hungry for positivity right now, and we can play a powerful role in feeding that hunger by celebrating even the smallest successes, recognizing and rewarding the new attitudes, mindsets, behaviors, and outcomes that the business and the culture need. We also need to look at our existing recognition programs and make sure that they are actually having the intended effect. Are they actually helping to cultivate that emotional connection and commitment? And so with Embrace, what we're doing is we're welcoming our fellow humans into the next phase with enthusiasm, with optimism, with generosity, and with hope. As you can see, embrace is a lot about positive reinforcement, but this isn't about the carrots and sticks of behavioral modification. This is about letting our fellow humans know that their efforts and their excellence are appreciated and that they're valued as individuals. We should never be afraid of thanking people too much. And I think organizations sometimes are. So, with the 6 E's as a background, what again does an office have to do with an employee engagement and culture? Well, something. The physical workspace, offices, cubicles, open spaces, play places, collaboration spaces, meeting spaces, they are all influenced by culture, and they also influence culture. Remember that I said at the beginning that culture is what we believe is expected of us, and we develop those beliefs based on what we learn and experience together over time. Well, the physical workspace is part of that experience. So an office can play a role in educate, it can play a role in enable, and it can play a role in empower. But often that role is as negative as it is positive. So as we look forward, we need to remember that a workplace and its culture extend beyond walls, especially in a hybrid world. In a hybrid world, we need to think about how our physical workspaces and our online workspaces make it easy or difficult for our fellow humans to adopt, exhibit, achieve the attitudes, the mindsets, and the behaviors and outcomes that we want and need. Now, if you have a garden and your garden is completely overrun by weeds, it's browning in the sun, it's failing to produce fruits, veggies, and flowers, you don't say, gardening is a failure, right? You say, I need to get back to the disciplines of gardening: planting, feeding, watering, and weeding. Repeating as needed, paying attention, sensing and responding to change. Similarly, if a hybrid workplace has a poor culture that doesn't inspire employees to develop that emotional connection and commitment, it's not because hybrid work is bad. It's that we need to get back to the disciplines of human centricity. Empathizing, encouraging, educating, enabling, empowering, and embracing our fellow humans. And we repeat as needed, and we sense and respond to change. So as we move forward into whatever this next phase is, we need to remember that employee engagement in the hybrid workplace isn't about getting people to do stuff. Instead, it's about cultivating an authentic emotional connection and commitment. So what can we do that will increase that sense of connection and commitment? And what might we be doing that's decreasing that sense of connection and commitment? What seeds can we plant? What can we do to hydrate and nourish the soil? And what beneficial plants can we nurture that are going to crowd out the weeds and lead to a thriving garden? I believe that work can be more than just another 4-letter word. I believe that work can be a path to self-actualization, and that business can make the world a better place. And I think if we all act more like gardeners and less like carpenters, I believe we can cultivate constructive, productive, effective, fun, fulfilling hybrid workplaces that inspire our fellow humans to develop that authentic emotional connection and commitment that we call employee engagement. So thank you for your time this afternoon. I'm delighted to be here with you and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Sure, Eryc, I have a book full of notes. I couldn't draw fast enough this time, so I do think I'm going to watch the replay again. Oh, Eryc, I think what happened for me, and I want us to just have a short discussion and get some of the participants also just to jump in. But I think for me, the metaphor of a carpenter versus a gardener, I vividly just saw some of the things that I'm doing at the moment, where I'm literally like driving nails in wood, trying to almost so forcefully take action because I want to get the results. All right. And it's not, I wouldn't call myself a shitty leader, but, you know, now that I look at that, I go like, okay, so what made me think that if I drive these nails deep enough in the wood that it's gonna work? And I think that realization and call in ourselves to be a lot more like gardeners. I had someone come and plant lawn for us last week, and they happened to plant dead lawn. And it was so dead that I had to remove it because I just didn't want, I looked at it and I go like, okay, there's nothing I can do that will bring this back to life. Maybe if I put enough manure on it, maybe, and if I'm patient enough. So I had someone bring in some green lawn. And I think that's that recipe of, okay, how do we tend our gardens? When do we need to be patient? When do we need to nurture? When do we need to sometimes take more action if we see, listen, the grass is, the lawn is dead. It's probably not going to come back to life.
I love that. I think smothering it in manure is such a great metaphor as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I see some shiny eyes. I see some amazing faces. I've been watching the facial expressions. All right. So now is your opportunity. Any questions for Eryc? Just put up your hand, just unmute yourself and go for it. Any reflections, any aha moments? I saw some smiles. I saw frowns mixed with smiles. Okay, fantastic. Christine, go for it.
Hey, so we're having every company has one of these issues, but I'm experiencing that employees don't want to engage, even though you are inviting them. How do I get them to engage? How do I, without being forceful, and saying, you have to come to the office and let's meet at the office because that's the only way we can do it. But how do I do it that they are engaging, even if they're in a hybrid experience, a workplace situation?
It's a wonderful question, Christine, and I feel you. It is a difficult position to be in, and we do want what's best for people, and so we want to just sort of pull them along. And it, as you're finding, it doesn't really work. I would ask first, how much listening has been done? How much do employees feel listened to and heard and understood?
Guessing not a lot.
Yeah. And that's what I encounter a lot with organizations. I think we jump to, as Chantel said, and with the best of intentions, we jump to action. We jump to, let's just drive things forward. But if we aren't having conversations first, if we aren't understanding what are the barriers for folks, and as I said, it's very individual as well. So, for me, for example, I'll just be very personal. I live with my 89-year-old mother-in-law. That creates a certain set of limitations on what I am and am not willing to do, as it relates to work. So each of us has our own stories like that, right? And so I think if we're not taking the time to listen, to understand what are the barriers employees are encountering, what needs aren't they getting met, we're never going to overcome the barriers. Is that helpful?
Yes, thanks.
Of course.
Eryc, and one of the things I thought about now as you were talking, this is probably the era of, assumptions more than any time before. It's like, we make so many assumptions. If we look at the screen, maybe Matthew's standing up, maybe Matthew has had like a really long day and he's now had enough, or maybe Matthew's got a sore back, or maybe Matthew maintains his lovely ass by standing up every now and again. So I think we make a lot of assumptions, and now more than ever we need to learn to clarify assumptions, because sometimes it's difficult asking. Sometimes it's really difficult asking, and I think Madeleine does a session in our Brand Warrior program where she looks at assumptions, and some of the, up to 80% of our assumptions are wrong, and we make decisions daily, and we value relationship based on assumptions. And I think it's about, now having sometimes the courage to ask and the courage to listen, to really listen to the answers.
So powerful. 80% of our assumptions are wrong. That's gold right there. Yeah.
Anyone else? Question or just a aha moment that you want to share?
Yeah, can I have a quick question, please?
Go for it, Mike.
Yep. So I guess my question is just, we all play roles in different aspects of our life. So when we talk about culture, and I think this has been more focused on organizational culture, but we have our family life. We might have social areas that we work in, and sort of so like almost how do you maintain the integrity of yourself as an individual within the culture of an organization, as well as in your personal aspects of your life and things like that. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think we've all got different ideas about how we live our lives and ethics and that kind of thing. And then you come into an organization, and especially a big organization, how do you manage that aspect, if I can put it that way?
I think that's such a valuable question, Mike. And what I'm hearing from you is how can I continue to be authentically me?
Yes.
Irrespective of the context, right?
Absolutely.
And that's a broad question that I think in all fairness goes far beyond my realm. But I will say this: that core sense of values at a personal level has to be clear. And I think without that clarity of what is it that's important to me, what do I value, what are my non-negotiables, without that, I can't even go forward with integrity because I'm integrous with what. So I think that definition of integrity is living true to what you believe and what you value. And I think especially that last part that I mentioned, which is what are my non-negotiables? What am I absolutely not willing to be a part of? That's really important. That's a really helpful clarity. And that certainly for me guides me in professional and personal endeavors every day. Is that helpful?
Cool. Very much so. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Mike, and before we go on to Clinton's question, I think one of the things that we've certainly seen is a much more of a realization that sometimes the environment that you're in is disconnected from where you are. And we've got so many people that say, listen, I love working from home because I'm not going to put up with that shit at the office anymore. And all of a sudden, being out of the environment is a boundary setting tool. But all that shows us is that like the ability to set boundaries was weak before COVID. Sure. And I think, now people are getting stronger, or choosing to get more skills to actually be able to renegotiate. And people saying, all right, so these are some of my non-negotiables. I had an executive the other day that so beautifully articulated for me that he doesn't take meetings before 9 o'clock because between 8 and 9 is his thinking time. And he doesn't spend time, after hours. And he wants the same for his people. But all of a sudden, now we need to be stronger about those things because people tend to put in so much more. People are so overcompensating almost for the fact that they're not seen. So I think a lot of work around that culture. All right, let's go to Clinton.
Cool.
Eryc, thanks a lot. It's very informative what you've told us and you've shared with us. Thank you very much for your time. I want to make a statement, but also just ask your view on this, obviously. It seems to me that you mentioned humanistic views and approach, and what I've recently read, I failed to remember what the reference was to, but saying that the workforce has changed to a point where we don't have one person, you don't have one job for your life, as many of us have known to grow up in at one time. It's many different jobs because the world's changing at the rate that it is. Would you say that these 6 E's that you've presented to us, would that, or at least how in line with the being mindful is it? Is that alluding to being mindful? Is it quite a bit involved towards that? I'd just like to know. Thanks.
That's a beautiful question, Clinton. Thank you for asking that. The connection between mindfulness and engagement, or the 6 E's. I think that the 6 E's have a lot of reference points. Certainly for some of you who've been exposed to human-centered design and design thinking, the 6 E's have definitely a roots there. They have their roots in some of the fundamentals of truly human-centric change management. But I think the question of mindfulness is one that I haven't given much thought to. And so I will say this just from a purely personal perspective, that for me it's mindfulness needs to be about self-awareness and other awareness. And I think that's where this connects to the 6 E's for me, which is that I can't just be all wrapped up in my needs and being mindful of myself. Mindfulness has to extend to my community, to my fellow humans. And if it does not, then is it even truly mindfulness? That'd be my question.
Thanks. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? Last question of the day, and then we're going to start closing.
Chantal, can I crash your party? It's Claire. Hi.
Hi, Claire. Absolutely. So nice to have you as our guest, Claire.
Thanks for letting me join. I really enjoyed it. And thanks, Eryc. I think it was really valuable. What I'd like to ask, I think that one of the elements you mentioned around empathy and the first question that you had really around, the response that you gave around like listening to your people and listening to what their needs are. My question is around, where we are trying to shift these cultures and these and make these changes. And I love the gardener analogy of where you're just practicing that discipline. But how do you do that at scale? I think that some of my team are on the call, and I'd like to think I understand their needs to an extent. They may disagree with me when we're offline, but I do think that doing it on a smaller scale where you can have those conversations yourself and where you can really connect with people on a one-on-one basis, you are more real versus trying to design this change and not design the change based on your comment, trying to make a change in this culture in some way, shape, or form, even if that's redesigning your garden, for lack of a better word, as opposed to trying to make sure you get 6 tomatoes out of it. How do you do that at scale in these organizations, and how do you scale that empathy? What is that boundary? Because you can't listen to, each manager, obviously, or each team member listens to their employees, but how do we actually ensure that the environments that we create are considering all of those needs and those personas?
It's a wonderful question, Claire, and I realize as I'm thinking about answering this, I am suspicious of my own expertise, and what I mean by that is I feel that we're all experts in our own worlds, in our own environments, in our own contexts. That said, I do spend a whole lot of time thinking about this, maybe an inordinate amount of time thinking about these things. And what I see that works, Claire, in terms of scale, is network effects. It's not something that necessarily blows up with some sort of tool or technology, though they can help and support. But it's really network effects, and in most organizations, those network effects happen through people managers. So what this becomes about is those disciplines of the 6 E's being practiced and understood by all managers of people, so that those conversations are happening in all parts of the organization, with all kinds of functions and at all levels. That to me is the only way to truly scale in an organization, is human to human. Fair?
Thanks so much, Eryc. Sorry, I was finding my mute button, but yeah, thank you. That makes complete sense. And I think Chantal's point, 1 heart at a time. That's definitely
that is so true.
There's just lots of hearts, but
there's a lot of hearts. And to that point too, I would say not quickly is also the answer. We love speaking of, speaking of reading lots of articles, you can find your 3-month culture transformation plan. Bullshit. It's not true. It's a process. And so I think to assume that it's going to happen quickly is also just setting ourselves up for failure and dissatisfaction.
And I think, Eryc, I wanna add to that. I think it's important that brands attract the right match of person, and that people make sure that when they join a company, it's the right match for them. Because I think if I speak about brand love, so we've got a culture that's definitely not for everyone. We're very real. We wear our hearts on our sleeves. We cry a lot. You know, sometimes we curse a lot. You know, it's like what you see is what you get, and it's pretty damn real. And you know what? If Neil Marley, if we forgot to put our menopause patch on, you know, maybe it's going to be a little bit harder day, but we're going to tell you. So I mean, we've had people in our team that they couldn't live with the, you know, immense ambiguity and, you know, huge flexibility and ownership, you know, that you just have to own stuff here. Nobody's going to micromanage you because that's not our style. And, you know, if you fall down, we'll be there to pick you up, but we're going to hold you accountable. So I think it's about like really, you know, letting so many companies have these beautiful job ads. And then I remember like joining a few corporates like that. And you know, my first 3 months, I had to play Candy Crush in the toilet just to cope because it was nothing like it said on the box, you know? So I think it's about that match, and then it's about the skills, because your garden, it's about those weeds, taking out the weeds, because taking out the weeds, sometimes nobody wants to take out the weeds, okay? It's a crappy job, but it's about having the skills of accountability, the skills of sometimes having those courageous conversations. And I think if you create like really, you know, a contagious love for the garden in an organization, and you give people the skills, then you're going to have the recipe for cultivating and having the ecosystem kind of remain in balance.
I love that, Chantal, and it reminds me of something that I don't think I've said, which is that, you know, I think we can often get caught up in the notion of trying to convince everybody to be engaged, and you know, and that's just not a reasonable goal. Yeah. Some people will, rather than engage, will choose to exit, and that's okay too. That's a perfectly valid and human choice to make.
Yeah. And I mean, I go back to Zappos, you know, they've got a process around that. So, Eryc, all that's left to do is just to say thank you for blessing us with your wonderful stories. I've had a wonderful time. And for the rest of you, that is, we're heading towards the end of day one. Can you believe it? Can you believe you've been on Zoom for almost 8 hours? Okay, I'm seeing no, I'm seeing yes. Matthew, who's that? How's that butt feeling? It's like I keep on picking on Matthew. All right, fantastic, folks. So I'm going to say thank you to Eryc. And Eryc, you're welcome to stay. We're just going to do a checkout, but you're also welcome to duck out.
I'm going to run, but thank you all. Thank you all so much. I appreciated meeting you all. Thanks for your questions and your attention. And I look forward to seeing you all again.
All right. Fantastic.